Welcome to Blue Collar Economics. My name is Dr. Brooks Mullen, and today we're going to talk about two things. Mostly what we're going to talk about are the 5 fundamental questions that an economy must answer. And then at the end, we're going to finish up talking about Adam Smith and his seminal work, The Wealth of Nations. The first question any economic system must answer is what will be produced? And in simple terms, this comes from supply and demand. On the supply side, it's very simple to understand. Things that are profitable will be produced. Things that generate losses will cease production or not be produced. Now, when we talk about profit is total revenue, that's money in, minus total cost, that's money out. Now, remember, we are talking in economic terms. So when we bring up total cost, that includes opportunity cost, which we've talked about before, but just as a brief reminder, opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative that we give up when we make a choice. So for example, if we're talking about production, if I use my factory to build good X, I cannot use my factory to build good Y. The loss of income from not being able to produce good Y would be the opportunity cost of good X. Or maybe if I don't use the factory to produce good X, I would sell the factory for this much money. The opportunity cost of producing good X is the loss of the income from the sale of the factory. Now that kind of explains the supply side of things. Whatever producers can make a profit doing, they're going to supply. Whatever they can't make a profit doing, they're not going to supply. But what about the demand side? On the demand side, we have to consider consumer sovereignty. Now, yes, the word sovereignty does come from political science. It literally means the ability to rule, the right to rule, and the consumer has the right to make their own decisions, to rule on the use of their own money. More to the point, the more utility we receive from a good or a service, the more we are willing to pay for it. So demand can be thought of as consumers voting with their dollars. The more we want something, the more we're willing to pay for it. And the more people that are willing to pay for something, the more potential profit it creates. If there's enough people that are willing to pay enough money for something that a producer can earn a profit doing it, a producer will come along to earn that profit. So in a market system, how do we decide what gets made? What people want the most, they offer the most money for, which creates the most profit potential, which then leads production to generate the thing people want most. Now, on the other side, we talked before about command systems, socialism, communism, feudalism, things like that. Under command systems, what are we going to make? Whatever the person in charge says, whatever the king says, whatever the Politburo says, whatever the CCP says, that's what we're going to make. So the big distinction right away between a market system and a command system is that a command system produces what the people in charge say, and a market system produces what the people of that society want most and that can be efficiently produced. The next major question that an economic system must answer is how are we going to produce those goods? We decided what we're going to make. Now, how do we make that? In a market system, how we make things is determined by efficiency. Things will be produced in the most efficient manner. Now, when we say efficiency, what we mean can be viewed two ways. You could view it as the most output for a unit of input, or you could view it as the lowest cost per unit of output. In other words, the way that generates the most profit per unit of output. Remember rational self-interest. Business owners, producers are incentivized by profit. If they can find a newer, better way to produce a good or service that lowers the cost, they can still sell the thing at the same price, they make more profit. So a market economy is in constant pursuit of the most efficient means of production. which if each individual market is doing that, then creates greater efficiency. If we use less resources to produce good X, that frees up those resources to be used to produce other goods and services. So the more efficient each part of the economy becomes, the more resources are available for more production. So if the overall economy in every sector is pursuing this efficiency, then we get overall higher levels of production throughout the economy. We get more stuff per person. Now, when we talk about efficiency, there's two major things that are going to determine efficiency. Number one, the price of the resources that are used in production. The more expensive the inputs are, the more costly the production is, the less efficient the production is. So the lower the cost of inputs, the more efficient the production. But the big thing, the second thing, the most important thing is technology. I'll say this now, and you're going to get sick of me saying it in future videos, but the single biggest determining factor in economic efficiency is technology. The better our technology, the more efficient we become, the less resources we need to produce something. So take, for example, a small accounting firm. If we were to go back to, say, the 1960s, 1970s, and let's just say, for example, at the time, one accountant could handle 20 clients. So if I'm going to handle 100 clients at my firm, I need 5 accountants. But that's not all I need. Those accountants have to keep track of all these documents and paperwork, which means I need filing clerks, probably more than one, let's say 2 filing clerks. And I need a physical location to store all that paperwork. So I need an actual facility that's got filing cabinets and locking filing cabinets. And because I'm storing valuable information, I have to protect that information. So we need a security guard to be there at night to make sure nobody breaks in and steals all the valuable documents. And those accountants need to interface with clients. They need to keep things in order. And to do that, they need secretaries. So let's say we need 3 secretaries across those 5 accountants to keep the office in running order. And then because we've got 3 secretaries and 2 file clerks and 5 accountants and a night security guard, we might also need an office manager to make sure the office is running efficiently. Now let's compare that 1960s, 1970s accounting firm to one today. A modern accountant has accounting software. A modern accountant does not need to spend as much time physically drafting all of these ledgers, physically drafting all of the math, double checking their calculations. Now we've got technology. One accountant can just scan in receipts. They can auto-populate the documents. They can auto-fill out the ledger. They can auto-calculate. So now instead of needing 5 accountants to handle 100 clients, we might need only 1 or 2 accountants. But because those 1 or 2 accountants are using software to handle all of this, they no longer need those 3 secretaries to keep all the client information in order. Now they've got software to keep track of all their clients. They've got databases of their clients. They've got email databases. They can even use AI to automate their contacting things. So they know when they get close to tax season to automatically start contacting the clients to get their documents in. All of those things. Maybe you need the 1 secretary, but certainly not 3. And because all the files are digital, we don't need the giant office space. We don't need the filing cabinets, and we don't need the night security guard. So now 2 people, maybe 3 at most, working out of a small office can do the work that we used to do with 11 people and a large office. We free up resources. We no longer need the real estate. We no longer need the labor. That frees up labor to work in other areas. That frees up that real estate for other uses. And so that's what we mean when we say technology is the most important factor for determining productivity. The more advanced our technology, the more productive we are and the less resources we need to produce a given level of output. Now, while a market system produces things in the ways that are most efficient, how does a command system decide how to produce goods and services? Well, easy. Whatever the command entity says, whatever the king says, however the CCP says, however the Politburo says, that's how we produce things. Now, the problem with this is that when we have command entities deciding how much to produce, there are considerations outside of efficiency. There are considerations that have to do with political power. In order to maintain their position of authority, in order to maintain that power, what you'll see is that your command entity might actually utilize more labor than is needed so that it has more influence over the labor force, or it might utilize more resources than are needed because control of resources is seen as prestige and therefore power within that governmental structure. Read Machiavelli for much more in-depth discussion of these kinds of things, but that's the idea, that it's not driven by efficiency, but by the motivations of a ruling class. The third question that any economic system has to answer, now that we've decided what we're going to make and how we're going to make it, is who is going to get that production? Who is going to receive those goods and services? Now, in a command system, you can probably guess by now, pretty simple, whoever the government says gets those things. You will be allotted those things, whether that is a feudal king deciding which resources to send to their serfs, whether that is a communist central bureaucracy deciding what the allocation per citizen, per worker, can vary by industry, geographic location, all these number of things. But that's arbitrary. In a market system, we allocate production according to a very simple concept: willingness and ability. If you want something and you can afford to buy the thing, you get the thing. If you don't want it, or you want it and you can't afford it, you don't get the thing. So willingness is simple to understand. Do we want the thing? Do we not want the thing? Do we place utility on the thing? Do we not place utility on the thing? But ability in a market system is based on income. And income comes from two sources. Number one, what resources do you have? Every individual has resources. Remember, the entire idea of a market system is that individuals and not the government control the majority of resources, control the majority of labor, control the majority of human capital, control the majority of physical capital, control the majority of land, control the majority of natural resources. So what determines your income? Number one, how much of those resources do you have? How much land do you have? How much natural resources do you have? How much physical capital do you have? How much human capital, that's knowledge and skills, do you have? How many labor hours do you have to work? The more resources you have at your disposal, the more income you can potentially earn. And the second determinant, obviously, is price. The higher the price you get for the resources you own, the more income you have from selling those resources. So the higher you earn for your labor, the higher you earn for your knowledge and skills, the higher interest you earn on the use of your property, the higher the price you receive for your natural resources, the more income you get. So again, in a market system, we allocate things, we allocate goods and services by willingness and ability rather than by government fiat. Now that we've decided what we're going to make, how we're going to make it, who's going to get the product, the next two questions we have to answer are a little more long-term. Question 4, how does our economic system promote change? Now, in a market system, change starts at the bottom. It comes from individuals. Remember what we said before. The more people want something, the more utility people receive from something, the more they're willing to pay for that thing. And the more they're willing to pay for that thing, the more potential profit they create. Production moves in pursuit of profit. And so, whatever people want the most, they offer the most money for. Production moves to where the most money can be earned, and thus, as demand shifts, production shifts to meet demand. It's a bottom-up approach. It's the aggregation of individual desires. If society's tastes change and they want something else, then they offer more money for that thing. And then because there's profit in making that thing, production moves in that direction. Demand drives change in a market economy. Now let's contrast that with a command system. Answer to how does a command system promote change is, number one, not very well. Remember that command systems are at the behest of a small number of people existing within the state. Whether we're talking state communism or whether we're talking feudalism, it is the will and desire of a small number of people. It does not matter if the population wants more potatoes and less rice. If the king says we grow rice, then we're growing rice. So, whereas a market system is very adaptable, it changes over time according to the desires of the people in that market system. Command systems do not adapt very well over time to meet the desires of people. They'd have to figure out what those desires are. And even in a perfect world, where the command system can poll everybody in the society and say, what do you want most? There is still a problem. When we study economics, you can ask people, how much is something worth? What value would you place on that thing? And they might say, oh, that widget is worth $10. But then in the same experiment, if you ask them to produce that $10 from their wallet and buy the thing from you, almost universally, that price goes down. People, when it comes to just being asked, what do you want, are not actually very good at telling us what they want. But when we actually have to vote with our money, when it comes down to what we actually spend our money on, when we have to sit down there and process that choice, make that marginal benefit versus marginal cost choice, we are a lot more efficient. So again, the market system is asking us to vote with our wallets, to vote with our dollars, to create that demand and drive change. Whereas the command system is serving production at the behest of a central entity. The final question an economic system has to answer is, how do we promote progress? How do we promote growth over time? And in a market system, this comes in two forms. It comes in technological advancement and capital accumulation. Let's start with technological advancement. Technological advancement in a market system is driven by, again, productivity. Technology that comes along that's an improvement, that's more productive, that's better than the previous technology, rises to take the old technology's place. Now, this often comes in the form of what we call creative destruction. When a new technology is innovated, it supplants and replaces the old technology. And if you want an example of what creative destruction looks like, let's talk about music. Let's talk about the history of the media that we use to consume music. Now, music, for most of human history, was something you had to experience live. You had to have musicians there to perform that music, which meant if you were not in the spot where those musicians were, you did not hear the music. But along came recording. And the first massively popular form of that came in the form of vinyl records. Now, vinyl records are still around, and there are reasons for that. We're not going to get into all of that here. But how does a vinyl record work? A vinyl record has a series of grooves with bumps in it. And a needle comes down, and as the needle moves up or down on those bumps, that needle oscillates pitch. It oscillates the sound that comes out of a speaker. And so literally we're hard coding with vinyl bumps, move the sound up, move the sound down, create this sound, create that sound by bobbing a needle up and down. Now, the thing is, vinyl records were a massive improvement over nothing or over wax cylinders. But there were a lot of problems with vinyl records. Vinyl is not a durable substance. If you drop a vinyl record, it could shatter. If you leave a vinyl record out on a hot day. Now, I come from the state of Texas, so let's say it's the 1970s and you were listening to records in your dorm room at the University of Texas. Now, I happen to know from people that went there back in the 60s and the 70s, they didn't used to have air conditioners in the student dorms at the University of Texas. So let's say it's a hot August day, it gets to like 110 degrees, and you left a vinyl record sitting half on, half off the counter. You left it there all day. You could come back and that record could have literally melted. It could have warped. So it's bad with physical impact. It's bad with heat. But also the big problem with vinyl is that it degrades. You have physical bumps in the vinyl that get moved by that needle. The more times that needle runs over the vinyl, it shaves a little bit of material off and a little bit more material each time. So then what begins to happen is the sound quality degrades. You get pops, you get skips, you get all these problems. Now, at the same time, from that flaw came art. Along came DJs. And we're talking early DJs, DJ Kool Herc and then Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. What these early DJs figured out was that people at parties really, really enjoyed certain parts of the music, what they called the breakdown, usually drum fills. And what was figured out was that if you put one record on one turntable and one record on another, you could cue up a small segment of music on one turntable, play it, then flip to the other turntable and keep playing that hook back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, why does that matter to the degradation of vinyl? Because the more you do that, the more it wears down. And so we get some language from this. Songs that people listen to a lot, the record would wear down on that track and it would get a groove in it. So what do we call something that's swinging music back in the day? We called it groovy. Why? Because literally that was the part of the record you played so much, you put a groove in it. Now that same grooving comes back around to the invention of hip hop. We get language like in the cut on the record that's produced from looping it over and over and over and over again. Now, while that did create some wonderful art and a large amount of American history and Americana, the other side of that is it meant that the more you liked a song, the faster you wore out the record and you lost the ability to listen to that song. So we advanced. A company called 3M invents the magnetic tape drive. You ever seen old movies when they've got computers and it's got like two big reels on it? They're going back and forth and back and forth. That's a magnetic tape computer. It's literally a magnetized piece of tape that records zeros and ones. Well, we figured out that we could record a series of zeros and ones to correspond to different pitches and tones, and thus it was invented the audio cassette. Now, the cassette had tons of advantages over vinyl. It could hold more information on a cassette tape than you could on a vinyl record. You could have the ability to fast forward and rewind. If you wanted to find a song on a vinyl record, you had to look for where it was, which is why old school DJs used to literally mark with crayons where the circle on the record, where the groove was, where that loop was they wanted to play. But if you were just at home and you wanted to put on a record, either listen to the whole thing, which is why we used to have albums and a culture of an album was meant to be listened to from start to finish, or you had to kind of stumble to find where the beginning of that track was. With the cassette tape, you could fast forward and rewind to certain points on the tape, and you could find the song you were looking for. But the big thing that the cassette tape had that vinyl records didn't was portability. The cassette tape could be played on the go. So along came cassette tape players in cars, and then later on the Sony Walkman, the portable cassette tape player. With cassette tapes, you could take your music everywhere. And within a relatively short period of time, cassette tapes had replaced records in record stores as the dominant form of music. And then Philips develops the CD. And the CD, the compact disc, is a reflective surface that is kind of like a record. It has much, much smaller grooving channeled in it, but it channels in a grooving that corresponds to a digital signal, that corresponds to a certain pitch and tonality output from a speaker system. And so the CD comes along, and the CD is a lot better than the cassette tape. Cassette tapes lasted longer than records, but after a certain number of plays, the tape would wear thin and the tape would wear out. The CD could be played over and over and over and over and over again without wearing down the quality of the audio. The CD also gave us more storage capacity than the vinyl record or the cassette tape did. We could make longer albums. We could put more songs on a CD. And the big advantage the CD had, besides better audio quality, arguable compared to a vinyl record, this isn't an audiophile channel, but it had the ability to skip songs. Now you didn't need to find it on the record. Now you didn't need to rewind and fast forward. You just clicked forward to the track you wanted to hear. And with the revolution of CDs and CDs replacing the cassette tape, came the end of the album, where the entire point of an album was to listen to it from start to finish, and the rise of singles, the rise of an album where there might be 3 or 4 songs on it that people liked and the rest were filler, but it was fine because people were going to skip to those songs. Say what you want for the death of a certain aspect of music culture, it was still a revolution. And then what came along? The MP3. What were the advantages of the MP3? It didn't degrade over time. It had the ability to not be physically worn out. CDs could get scratched and they wouldn't play anymore. CDs could get damaged, they wouldn't play anymore. You can't damage an MP3. Now, the MP3 does have a disadvantage. It's audio compression, and the fact that you shave off the upper and lower parts of a bandwidth of sound to make it fit into an MP3 produced music that had lower quality tone, lower quality audio. It's why today we still see vinyl records for hardcore music collectors, because the sound is better on a vinyl record than it is on an MP3. But with the rise of MP3s, we then moved on to the next thing, which was streaming. All along the way, what happens? Our ability to consume music goes from, I have this one record, I can play it from start to finish at a physical location on a record player, to I can take my phone with me anywhere I want to go. I can listen to any music that's ever been made, and I can do it with the push of my thumb. But each iteration replaces the old. Now, yes, we're in a weird situation now where vinyl is the #1 physical medium for music, replacing, in a way, CDs and cassettes. But if we look at hours of music listened to, the vast majority of music is now listened to on streaming. And that's how all technology works. The computer replaced the typewriter. The automobile replaced the horse and cart. When we create the new thing, it destroys and supplants the old thing. Now, the other way that we promote progress in a market system is through capital accumulation. Capital, again, is tools, physical things used in the production of other goods and services. So, over time, we acquire more capital. The more capital we have, the more productive we can be. The more capital we can acquire, the more productive we can be. The more capital we can acquire, and on and on and on and on. So through advancing technology and the accumulation of capital, we gain productive capability. The final thing that we're going to talk about in this video is a little bit of economic history. Now, if you know anything about market economics, you've probably heard the name Adam Smith. Well, Adam Smith was a pragmatist philosopher. Remember, there was no such thing as economics at the time. Pragmatism was a school of philosophy that was focused on the real world, what you can do, what could happen, things like that. Pragmatism can be traced back to Niccolo Machiavelli and his school and his philosophies about studying not the virtues of mankind, these inherited traits given to them by God or divinity or nature or something like that, but rather on what people wanted and what they did to achieve that. Adam Smith is this philosopher living in the Enlightenment era. Now, you'll see as we talk about Adam Smith that a lot of the same things that informed other Enlightenment philosophers like Rousseau also informed Adam Smith. And Adam Smith's most important work, his seminal work, was On the Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. And that's not a coincidence that the same year the United States is founded on Enlightenment principles and philosophies that Adam Smith's work of Enlightenment philosophy is published. In fact, what you're going to see is a lot of similarity between Enlightenment philosophy and what Adam Smith was saying. So what Adam Smith did is he studied the markets of London. At the time, London was the undoubted center of global commerce. More than half of all the goods and services in the world were funneled through London. And Smith studied the markets in London where goods and services were traded. In fact, the reason we call it a market system and we call it market economics is because Smith was studying markets. Had he been in Morocco, we would call it bazaar rather than market. So we would say bazaar economics and a bazaar system. I digress. Now, what Adam Smith noticed is that the market system created a curious unity of public and private interests. Smith noted that the more people wanted something, the more they were willing to pay for it. And the more they were willing to pay for it, the more profit potential it created. And the more profit that could be earned from it, the more people rose to produce that good or service to earn those profits. And so what Smith noted was very much an Enlightenment ideal, that by all of us acting in our own rational self-interest, pursuing our own individual self-interest, the economy would evolve and adapt over time in order to produce what society wanted most. That ironically, by pursuing our own self-interest, society as a whole became more efficient and got more of what it wanted. Now, this at the time is a revolutionary idea. Remember, market systems were not what dominated the world. Command systems were. Monarchy was. The rule of kings dominated society. And what Smith showed is very much what other Enlightenment philosophers argued, that we don't need a king. We don't need somebody that claims that God gave them the right to rule over everyone else. It's called the divine right. That's where royalty took its power from, this belief that God ordained them to rule over everyone else. In fact, what Smith said is, if we get rid of the king, now he didn't expressly mention getting rid of the king, but if we didn't have the king, and each individual just pursued their own self-interest, society as a whole would be better off. So again, these same revolutionary ideas. Well, government comes from the consent of the governed, that government should represent the collective will of the people. Smith was also arguing that the economy could represent the collective will of the people, and that the economy, to be its most effective, should represent the collective will of the people. So again, it's inseparable from Enlightenment era philosophies. Now, what Smith called this change over time is the invisible hand. He said that as all of us pursue our own self-interest, The economy, as if guided by an invisible hand, would move and adapt and change over time to fulfill those desires. Now, yes, when Smith said the invisible hand, he was invoking God. Because at the time, even if you were trying to produce science, you had to invoke God. Everything had to invoke God, because if you didn't invoke God, you risked the wrath of the church and all the crap that went along with that. Now, as we study more economic history, when we start talking about classical economics by the 1830s, that no longer becomes necessary. Now we can cite the scientific and mathematical realities of it. But Smith's flowery language was again emblematic of Enlightenment era writing and Enlightenment era philosophy. All right, y'all, that's going to do it for us. I've been Dr. Brooks Mullen. This was Blue Collar Economics. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.